I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music. On this podcast, Tom and I discuss an earful of topics pertaining to modern music, including artist deep dives and monthly and annual new music wrap-ups. It's that time again. 2016 has finally come to a close. So it's time for Tom and I to discuss our favorite albums of 2016 and give you guys the Velocities in Music top albums of 2016 list. Before we get started, you can help support Velocities in Music. Subscribe to Velocities in Music on your favorite podcasting device to automatically get our latest podcast episode sent to your device for your listening pleasure. Also, Velocities in Music doesn't want your money. We also don't want to introduce any ads into this podcast yet. Right now, all we want is for you to share Velocities in Music with family or friends whom you think would benefit from joining in on the music discussion Tom and I are trying to create. Tom.
Yes.
2016 is finally coming to a close.
It is.
This has been a year where we have lost some great musicians. I think.
I know, man.
I mean, I think that is the number one thing most memorable about 2016 is all of the great artists that we've lost.
Yeah, just within the last week, George Michael.
Mm-hmm.
Like, holy crap.
David Bowie, Prince.
At the beginning of the year.
Leonard Cohen.
Throughout the entire year, it was just like this evenly spaced just barrage of death.
Mm-hmm.
And it was terrible.
Yeah, it was pretty depressing.
Yeah.
It was pretty depressing. A presidential election aside, it was pretty depressing.
Yes.
So, yeah, I'm ready for 2017.
Same here, man.
But the other side of the coin is there was some really good music,
of course,
released
always.
in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always one of my favorite exercises every year when we always take a couple days off work at the end of the year and we do nothing but listen to music for like a couple days straight, and then we spend a day talking about it.
Yeah.
And that is today, and it's one of my favorite days of the year.
I know, I'm excited.
And I think the thing about our podcast is we somehow, Tom, always come up with a list that is pretty different from the standard fare.
Oh, I mean, sure.
if you go out there and Google best albums of 2016, you're going to get Pitchfork and The Guardian. You're going to get a lot of lists out there, and they're all going to have very similar variety of albums in a very similar order. And I personally have a little beef with that. Like, I think there should be more variety between different sites' lists.
Yeah. I think that, of course, there's going to be a small bit of each of those lists that are unique to the publication, right? But I think that too much in music discussion today, there's not enough individuality. And I think a lot of these sites, and this is just speculation because I'm throwing accusations out a little bit here, but I feel like some of those sites, it's almost like they're looking over each other's shoulders saying, oh man, if I don't include this album, then people are going to think less of me and it'll kill our reputation. Or something. Like they're looking for that, they're looking for that similarity. And to that point, then tastes and lists start to converge, and I don't think that's very healthy. I think it's good for them to be drastically different.
Yep, and ours I think compared to a lot of the lists out there, I mean, there's some notable albums on our list, which we'll get to here in a minute. There's some notable albums on our list that are going to be on everyone's list this year, but there's also hopefully some gems that aren't on everyone else's list. The other side of this, though, is that there's of course going to be some omissions from our list that arguably are very good albums and deserve to be on a list. Maybe not ours, but somebody's list.
Right.
And we always do the last like podcast of 2016 music calendar, which we'll actually put out in early January. We did one last year called Total Misses and Honorable Mentions. And what we actually did is we asked you guys to call out the albums that we did not discuss during the year, and make sure that we revisit them and then give you our thoughts on them. So we'll be doing that again this year. So if as we go through this list, if you guys hear of any albums that we're not saying or notice that we're not talking about certain albums or omitted something from our list, let us know. Leave us a comment, send us an email, Facebook message. We will include them on our Total Misses and Honorable Mentions podcast.
Another thing, Jake, that I think it's important we be transparent about is, what albums we're talking about today compared to the rest of the albums that we've listened to throughout the year. Throughout 2016, we listened to, we've got a huge spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
I would think we listened to between 430 and 440 albums.
Right.
Which is quite a bit for just us two guys, right? So today we're going to be talking through our top 20. Think about that. That's only 4 to 5%. That's the top 4 approximately percent that we covered throughout the year.
Right.
So, people will probably notice that there's some stuff left off our list that maybe we spoke highly of during our monthly wrap-ups, that people just expect us to love. And in all reality, we probably do. Because when you think about it, like, you and I like a lot of music. We try to focus our efforts on music that we will like.
Yeah.
So, I would say probably our top 25 to 30% of the year are albums that we really liked a lot.
Absolutely.
And we're really only taking the very tip of the iceberg there.
Yep. And something to note is we're only going to talk about 20 in this podcast as our top albums, VIM's top albums of 2016. Top 20 albums is what we'll talk about in the podcast. But on our website, we'll actually post top 70. I think we did that last year in 2015, so we'll do that
More
again.
complete list.
More complete list. As always, for those of you who just joining in, checking out Velocities in Music for the first time, Tom and I have been doing this for a number of years. We originally, for about 4 or 5, I think 5 years, did a podcast on, or we had a YouTube channel, which is still there. We're still posting these podcasts to it, called Velocities in Music, where we did video album reviews. After a while, we decided to take a little time off, came back, and reinvented ourselves as a podcast. So what kind of albums do we like, Tom? Well, we like albums that we are really focused on the full album listening experience, being able to press play at the beginning of the record or drop the needle and let the entire record play through. That entire listening experience is probably our number one thing. Generally, I think we like very original, progressive music.
Yeah, we do.
Anything that has a lot of ideas, a lot of dynamics, a lot of intensity in different formats. And always a good hook is a good thing too.
Yep.
So those are the things that we typically look for and are the basis for our top albums of 2016. So let's get started.
Let's dive into it. At number 20 on our list, we have Phantogram's new album 3. They're aptly titled third LP, 3. This one, they've changed a lot since the days of Eyelid Movies, their debut album, which was a little more chill, had a little bit more trip-hop influence, but they've always been more influenced by some bigger DJ-based sounds. And I think that's starting to come out more in their music as Sarah, as a vocalist, becomes more of a powerhouse. Right. She can sing a little more strongly now. And 3 really showcases that. They're moving in a poppier, sometimes dancier direction, but the songwriting remains strong. And 3 is an album that, as I continued to listen to, I just liked it more and more.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. And while they did move towards, probably more fiercely towards the pop hook and structure, they still had a couple tracks in there that really showcased their ability to write a great song. You take track 5, the really expansive, experimental Barking Dog.
Yeah.
That song, I think, just gives me chills the way it's performed. And you can't even come close to calling that a pop song.
Oh, no, not at all.
I did find that this album was very front heavy. I really liked like the first 5 or so tracks, and then the back half doesn't really play quite as strongly. But just overall, some of the tracks on this record are so good that it lifts everything up on the album, and it just makes for a great record. And Phantogram should be proud of their third record, 3. At number 19 on the VIM Top Albums of 2016 list, we have Gojira with Magma. This is Gojira's 6th record. They are a French heavy metal outfit.
Yeah.
And this is really, I would classify this more as sludgy, doomy with a dash of prog.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to put it. In fact, that's one of the things I loved about this album is how seamlessly they were able to blend different metal subgenres into something that sounds really cohesive, and because of the variety, never gets stale. Plus, the songwriting is just strong throughout. The performances are strong. They do a good job of integrating some vocal hooks as well as some guitar hooks.
Right.
But still maintaining, I think, their credibility as a more actual metal band, not rooted in pop structures and things like that.
Yeah, they do a great job of providing you with just the natural intensity that you expect from metal music. Also, a great breadth of dynamics that you hear on the album, with just enough melody in there to really make this really interesting. There was 2 key tracks from this record that we kept coming back to, Silvera and Stranded.
Yeah.
Both were just wonderful tracks, but overall, apart from just the production of the drums, which just sounded
they
awful,
sound weak, yeah.
Outside of that, this album was really just exemplary on all cylinders.
Number 18 on our list, we have Bon Iver's new album, 22 A Million. I'm actually surprised that this made it as high on our list. If you recall back to when this came out in our monthly wrap-up, Jake, you and I had a little bit of a debate over this.
Yeah.
I think you started out pretty high. I started out fairly low on this. And over time, we kind of ended up meeting in the middle. I ended up coming up on this album a lot. I still think there's some folks loving it more than I do.
I think both of us. I mean, it's 18 on our list.
Right, that's pretty significant with how much crap we listened to this year, right? Not crap. I'm not trying to, you know what I mean.
I follow.
You feel me. Anyway, so this album, where it really grew on me is just getting to know the songs more. A lot of these songs just stuck with me. Bon Iver is really capturing a unique sound on here. There's something very beautiful about the melodies. Of course, Justin Vernon's voice is as gorgeous as ever, but it's behind this almost post-apocalyptic sounding, distorted, disconnected presentation at times where things are just kind of broken up and chaotic sounding. But I think what he's able to do on this album is create some beauty through that.
Right.
But still, I mentioned in our wrap up when we talked about this that to me it felt like there was more of a focus on sound than on songwriting, and I still think that a little bit, but I actually take that back for the most part, because I just think a number of these songs are great. I wanted to include a lot of them on my favorite songs list.
Right, and the tracks that you like that you favor on this record are different than the tracks I favor. So that's a good sign of a very well made album. Or at least what we've found over the years, Tom. And I think that one thing to keep in mind with 22 A Million is these songs have stuck with us over the months since this album came out. And that takes something special too. And while the songwriting might have taken a step back, the very if you strip this thing down to its skeleton of just like the actual chord progression, it's still very well written, even if it is simple. And then you have all the dressings of the immaculate production and progressive production on top of it, which just really makes this a special listen. I think that the number one thing that Bon Iver's third album has for it is that this is a very unique experience. There's nothing else out there like that, and that's in 2016. That's a very special quality. I've been sleeping in a stablemate. Not gonna do you no favors, but I gotta shoot you. At number 17 on our list, we have the band Wussy and their 6th record, Forever Sounds. This is an indie rock band. They're from Ohio. And I would describe Forever Sounds as noisy rock with both, you have the male and female vocals, and everything has kind of this shoegazy edge to it. It
does, yeah.
But the thing I really like about this is they aren't afraid to dive into more complex melodies, tackle complex subject matters in the lyrics. And this album, I remember just being kind of this experience as you listen to it. It really kind of just unfolds as the album plays on. And there's a number of notable tracks on this record that I kept coming back to.
Just really strong songwriting. This is an album that I don't hear anyone talking about. I'm not really sure why, because I think the songwriting's strong. The persona that the vocalists create is really interesting because it can go from heartfelt to really satirical, track by track, and there's just a lot to offer on this album. But it's a sound and a presentation and a songwriting style, all those elements combined, that is not something I really hear from anywhere else, and they just pull it off really well. Next on our list is an album that I liked significantly more than Jake.
Yes.
Just why it showed up on our list. Tao and the Get Down, Stay Down, A Man Alive. What really grabbed me about this album is, first off, Tao's vocal presentation. She's just so confident in her vocal approach and does a lot of different styles and kinds of moods on here. This is a really fun indie rock record where the instrumentation is all over the place. It's kind of a collage at times, almost reminiscent of like if you like Tune Yards or even to a degree some of Beck's 90s work. That's the kind of vibe that I got from it. But once again, driving that sound is just what I felt was some really strong songwriting, some really well-constructed melodies, and a lot of good variety. Those are the things I'm looking for in an album. A Man Alive really nails it.
Why didn't I chase a stone cold thief with a regular grab? I find the scene of the crime. I take my body back. I resent the invention. Listen.
At 15 on our list, we have Weezer's self-titled album, Weezer. They've done a few of these. This one is Weezer's White Album.
Yes.
And this came out earlier this year, and I was very surprised by how much I liked this record.
Yeah, same here.
Weezer is a band that I know, Tom, you have traditionally liked Weezer much more than I have. Mm-hmm. I really love Blue Album, and then have struggled with pretty much every Weezer album since then.
Yeah.
But this album surprised me because I found that Weezer was really focusing on trying to present a more rock-oriented sound. The guitars play a pretty big role on White Album. Mm-hmm. The production is a little bit grittier, and while they edge towards a more rock-oriented sound, kind of getting back to their roots, they also kept a lot of the pop sentiments that have kept them very popular in the mainstream over their past, decade and a half. And I really like that kind of dichotomy that they're trying to go for here and execute. Now, the thing that I found about this album was that there was a little bit of disparity in the quality of the tracks. There are some absolutely just great tracks on White Album. And there are some that are meh, but the problem that I saw was that while this is a compilation, really that's kind of a negative thing for me personally. But I think that gets kind of wiped away when you have really great tracks like Jacked Up, Thank God for the Girls. This is just a really well done album.
At number 14, we have the new Daughter album, Not to Disappear. We really like Daughter's debut album, If You Leave, and now Not to Disappear is not a disappointment at all. Really great indie rock album, very spacey, I shouldn't say spacey, spacious sound.
Yeah, right.
A lot of reverb in the guitar. One thing, Jake, that I really liked about this album, coming from If You Leave, If You Leave, she addressed in her lyrics a lot of insecurities, things like that. I feel like on Not to Disappear, she's taking those insecurities and just yelling at them.
Yes.
Much more aggressive in the lyrical approach and in the content and subject matter, and I really like that kind of biting sense.
Yeah, it really plays off of the album title and really magnifies the meaning there. To me, what really made this album special, and there's a number of tracks on here that made it onto my favorite tracks of 2016 list. But just the dynamic contrast that Daughter is able to create in every single one of these songs. You have a lot of austere guitars, expansive drums, and a lot of and I think this was more new in this record, but a lot of subtle electronic layers that just built up into this wall of sound that you hear in most of these tracks. So you couple that with just the great songwriting, and what you have is a recipe for a really dynamic, impactful indie rock record. At number 13 on the VIM top album list of 2016, we have Ray LaMontagne with Ouroboros. Ray LaMontagne, he's an American singer-songwriter. Ouroboros is his sixth studio record, and we really like this one from the moment that we played it, because it has this bluesy singer-songwriter vibe, which is a really refreshing take on the singer-songwriter genre. I got a lot of ethereal moodiness to it, some of like Pink Floyd's earlier stuff, a little bit of Beck in there as well, and a number of things that really caught my eye on this record is that it's divided into two halves. The first four tracks are all are titled Part 1 hyphen then whatever the name of the track is, and then the back half is Part 2. And generally what we found is the tracks in Part 1 are a little bit more upbeat, and the tracks in Part 2 are a little bit more instrumental based and moody.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really unique approach, really original approach, and I love it when artists do that. But overall, I thought that just the combination of the lush instrumentation and the acoustic and electric guitars and the keys and the vocal choruses and the piano, everything that came together to make these songs was just so well composed and well executed, and the production that they put on top of it just makes this thing shimmer. It's a great record, and just one that I kept coming back to throughout the year.
Yeah, it's great to hear such an albumized experience from an artist who's traditionally more rooted in individual songs. You know, that songwriting, that melody construction is really Ray LaMontagne's trademark. And to see him take that and shift it into a higher level album experience is just really cool. I think he nailed it with this one.
Be careful of each step you take, and the pressure.
At number 12 on our list is the new Metallica record, Hardwired to Self-Destruct. Now, what is there to say about this album that we didn't already spend like 40 minutes saying on our previous podcast?
We spent a long time talking about this record.
There's not much to say.
And if you want to hear about that, check out
Yes.
our part 3 of our Metallica deep dive,
Right.
the 2000s on.
But to give this album its due in the context of our list, I gotta say, you know, it crept up our list a lot more than I thought it would.
Me too.
At first, you and I were not all that keen on it. I didn't even think it'd probably make our list at all, and then it ended up at number 12. This was an album that really grew on us, and I think you'll find, Jake, you know, both of us, we really value albums that are growers.
Right.
Albums that don't play all their cards right away, that you have to dig at, you have to get to know.
Right. Which coincidentally don't do very well for our podcast.
Right, for the monthly wrap-ups.
Right,
Yeah.
because we only get like a couple listens in, and then we're having to talk about them, and then the rest of the year happens, and we still love this record.
Right,
So
exactly.
This certainly had that, even with it releasing like right before Thanksgiving. It's only been a little over a month, but it's been I haven't stopped listening to it. And there's the thing that I said in our deep dive, and I'll say again here, is that there are a number of great tracks on this record, and there are some lackluster tracks as well. But throughout the whole thing, you have it never really has a bad moment. It's just a huge record. It's 2 hours and 37 minutes long. It's a double album. It's an incredibly long record, and actually that's the deluxe version time. It's really it's really not quite that long, but it's a very long record, and so arguably that there's some fault there, that maybe they should have trimmed a couple tracks out, made it a little bit more of a cohesive listening experience. But for what it does offer, it does very well, and there's a number of tracks on here, Hardwired, Atlas Rise, and Moth into Flame, that I think are just outstanding. Some of the best rock tracks I've heard all year.
In the name of desperation, in the name of wretched pain, in the name of all creation, count insane, we're so fucked, shit out of luck.
Following Metallica at number 11 on the Velocities in Music top albums of 2016 list. It's 2016.
Yes.
We have Kendrick Lamar, Untitled Unmastered.
Yeah.
Is this an actual album? Well, technically, yes, but it really kind of is a B-sides record to the Kendrick Lamar's 2015 To Pimp a Butterfly. They all recorded in the same recording sessions, and some of the songs, it just didn't seem to fit the statement that Kendrick Lamar was going for with To Pimp a Butterfly, made it into this Untitled Unmastered album, which quite candidly deserves to be its own record. I'm actually,
absolutely.
like, after listening to this all year and reflecting back on it, I have to say that I kind of wish that this would have gotten dressed up a bit more.
Really? See, I actually love it how it is. Because it's also kind of a power play. It's like Kendrick Lamar's table scraps are like
Sure.
a freaking 5-star meal.
Exactly. And that's just a statement of how talented this guy
Yeah.
is. What I mean is not necessarily in the production or the presentation. I think the music is perfect on its own. What I would change is just the presentation of that.
Oh, gotcha,
like actually give it a title and actually give the tracks
song
name.
titles.
Yeah,
Yeah.
since all the tracks tracks are just titled, untitled, and then a number. It kind of makes the music speak for itself. So I kind of like that a lot too. There's a number of tracks on here that are very provocative, but you can't reference them because if you say it's the untitled track, well, there's a whole bunch of others.
True.
So it does kind of just speak to the quality of the music, and it makes you focus more on what the songs actually offer individually.
Yeah, and these songs, I love the sound, the direction he's going for. This is even jazzier on the whole than To Pimp a Butterfly was. Of course, not as focused, but this is just a great album to put on, kind of chill to. It's not overly aggressive. It's kind of subdued, but still the rapping is smooth. The lyrics are great. The overall sound is just alluring. I mean, I'm always eager to hear what this guy's going to do next.
But don't be scared of me, girl. I can't explain. I know it's foreign to you. I know it's hard to believe. God, give me the favor. I can't explain. More than a compliment, and I can be some assistance. Let me show you how I can.
Kicking off the top 10 of our favorite albums of 2016, we have Lisa Hannigan at Swim. This is another album that I don't know why people aren't talking about Lisa Hannigan.
Yeah, this should be in top of everyone's list.
This is a terrific album. It's what would you call this? Indie rock, art rock,
moody folk.
Yeah, there are a lot of folk elements in there. But where it takes that folk sound is it does make it, once again, I've said this about another album on this list, but it makes a very spacious and big reverbed out sound. And I love that. And Lisa Hannigan's vocals just kind of whisper through the mix.
Right.
And they create this just perfect kind of creeping sensation. Complements her songwriting really well. She just knows how to set a mood really, really marvelously.
Yeah, the songwriting and composition is fairly simple. It's pretty much just piano, some light acoustic guitar, and it's just very well written. But the core of this sound on this record is Lisa Hannigan's vocals. And I made the comment when we did our wrap up that it was like if Bjork put out an acoustic guitar based album, but she has this moody voice, but her voice just sends chills down your spine. And you can just hear the texture in her vocals, and it just adds such an intimacy and authenticity to the sound. This song or this album was great throughout. In particular, I could not get off the track "We the Drowned." I thought that was just a chilling effort. At number 9 on our top albums list, we have a bit of a different type of record. Non-Keen with their album, The Gamble. They actually had 2 albums that came out.
Yeah.
The Gamble and then Oddments of The Gamble came out later as kind of their untitled and mastered as to Kendrick Lamar. But The Gamble caught us by surprise at just how much we liked it from the get-go, because first of all, it's combining 2 genres that Tom and I have a particular affinity for, which is ambient and post-rock. And that's what I think that this album really is. It's ambient and post-rock mixed together, but not overly done in one way or the other. It's a very nice balance. And one thing that I really loved about The Gamble was it's built around the rhythm section. The bass and drums play a huge role on every one of these tracks, and even the guitar adds to that, and it creates this just addicting and moody environment. And they're able to convey a lot of moods and ideas without the use of vocals or lyrics or catchy hooks, and I think that is what is most impressive about The Gamble.
Yeah, and you have the bass and drums are actually really jazzy.
Yes.
And then everything's just drenched in these nice, like, analog sounding synths that just warm everything up, and you just hear those jazz and kind of post-rock elements seep through the mix. This is, I found to be quite an addicting album, a mood that you want to really come back to. And number 8, we have an album that is actually showing up higher on a lot of people's lists.
Yep.
That's David Bowie's newest and unfortunately last album, Black Star. The guy went out with the bang. This is, probably never going to live up to some of the work he did in the 70s. It's showing that Bowie can still innovate and still be vital even in 2016. There are just some crazy beats on here, some really long tracks, a lot of great melodies that even in Bowie's age, as he was in his late 60s, I think he did a great job of writing songs that fit his current voice, his vocal style, and what he's able to do, as a guy in his 60s. So I think it's really cool to see that David Bowie was, even in his final days with his final efforts, able to make a parting gift to the world musically that still leaves his mark. It's indelible on music and is still, pretty darn enjoyable to listen to.
On the day of execution, only women even smile. At the center of it all.
At number 7, we have Juju with Plays the Music of Twin Peaks. Tom,
Yeah.
you and I love Twin Peaks.
We're a little biased.
We're a little
for this.
biased
Yeah.
here. I remember there was a time when we were in college. This is a while ago now. 'Cause
Yeah.
we're aging. Where we used to get together at least one night a week for Twin Peaks night. We get all of our friends in a room and we watch an episode or two of Twin Peaks. We
Yeah.
got the DVDs and we were watching it, and it was the greatest thing ever.
It was,
It's
yeah.
one of my fondest memories. And in 2012 we reviewed my first exposure to Juju, which was their album Always, which terrified the living crap out of me.
Yeah.
So the fact that Juju is now going to create an album about this very creepy David Lynch produced TV show Twin Peaks, it's like this combination was just destined to happen.
It was. Before I even heard about it, or before I listened to it, I should say, and I just heard Juju is doing a whole album of Twin Peaks music, I'm like, yeah,
That sounds-
sign me up.
sign me
I
up.
want to hear what that sounds like. And it did not disappoint. It's kind of odd for this high on our list, I feel like, for an album of this kind of character where a band is covering a TV show soundtrack, essentially, but they just nail it. This creates a world of its own, and of course we're a little bit biased because we love the TV show, but I think even people who might not have that to connect it with could listen to this and just become immersed in just the horrifying world that is created on this album. And then of course if you see the show, it's even complemented further. But I think just they make these pieces, Angelo Badalamenti's scores, so much more textured, so much more modern, and of course, while the writing will go to writing credit, to Angelo, I think that the arrangements here and the choice of instrumentation, mixing, performance, all of those are just spot on. And number 6, we have Lucy Dacus, No Burden. This is a newer artist, and she's just great. I mean, obviously, she got number 6 on our albums list. No Burden is an album that, once again, combines a lot of styles. That's something that you and I like a lot, Jake, because it's a recipe for originality. This has an indie rock feel, but it also has kind of a folk country feel at times. But what she does that I think is different than really what's indicative of either of those genres is she has much more expansive songwriting. There are some longer tracks on here that avoid the kind of song structures that you would get from something like country or folk.
Right.
But aside from indie rock, one thing that she does in the arrangements that's different from a lot of indie rock is the songs aren't very driving. They're not, you look at the percussion, it's not always just hi-hat and snare driven. There's a lot of tom work. There's once again just a lot of reverb on all of the instrumentation, and then Lucy Dacus's vocals, which are very nice and coy and a little bit twee. It just has this innocence to it that you can't help but get behind.
Yeah, and I just loved the guitar sound. I thought the way that was recorded and produced was just perfect and really enhanced some of the best qualities of the album that Lucy Dacus did in the songwriting. The main thing that really made this record successful succeed, not only in the month that it came out and when we listened to it, but also I kept coming back to it all year because not only is it a great straight-through album listening experience, but there are a number of tracks on here that I can't get out of my head. And Strange Torpedo, Troublemaker Doppelganger, Map on a Wall, like all of these are just wonderful tracks that I can't stop listening to, and that is the sign of a really, really perfect album. When you have a great album listening experience coupled with tracks that you can't get out of your head, that's the sort of thing, that's the sort of gem that Tom and I have this desperate longing and search for throughout the year. Number 5 on our top albums list is an album I am particularly excited about. Still, it came out back in August. We have Wye Oak with their 5th studio record, Tween. Now, Tween is an interesting record. It's shorter. I think it's one of their shorter records at 34.5 minutes, and it's actually a bunch of repurposed songs from the Civilian and Shriek days, their previous 2 albums. Both albums, which I mean, we love Civilian when it came out, and Shriek, I think we were very favorable on, although it's not. We didn't love it as much as Civilian. Now Tween has taken all of these previously written, scrapped, and repurposed songs and represented them in a way that I think is just very, very appealing. I would say that the songs on Tween have a much more upbeat approach. There's a sense of optimism and hopefulness on these songs that I haven't gotten from Civilian or Shriek, the 2 albums that we've covered on Velocities in Music in the past. But there's a number of songs on this record that I just couldn't stop listening to.
Yeah, I think that they actually took some of the best elements of Civilian and Shriek and put them together. It has more of the guitar focus that Civilian had,
right.
But some of the more glittery electronic components that Shriek had, and it works so well. I mean, these songs, you mentioned it's a shorter album, not as many tracks, but each track is just hit after hit out of the park. I think they did a great job. At number 4, we have a relatively new album, came out at the end of November, and that's A Tribe Called Quest's We Got It From Here, Thank You For Your Service. A Tribe Called Quest, classic hip-hop group, their final album after the departure of Phife Dawg, who passed away earlier in 2016, another musical icon lost in 2016. But man, did they make a statement with this album? It's a double album, and while I still think the first few tracks are just absolute highlights, they kept me coming back to this record, and the more and more I listened to it, I just fell in love with it. This was an album from 2016 that probably more than almost any other album just had replay value. There's so much going on in this album, so much to offer from the combination of all of the tracks, and I just don't think they really could have made a better parting statement as a group.
We don't believe you, cause we the people are still here in the rear, yo, we don't need you. You ain't a killing off good young nigga move. When we get hungry, we eat the same fucking food. The ramen noodle. This simple voodoo is so maniacal, reliable to pull a juju. The irony is that this
At number 3 on our favorite albums of 2016 list, we have Cross Record with their second record, Wabi Sabi. Now, Cross Record is a very unknown band. They don't really have even a Wikipedia page that we know about, but this album came out in January, and instantly Tom and I just fell in love with this record because it's an indie rock record that focuses much more on an artistic sort of presentation. You have a lot of dynamic contrast built into these songs and a lot of just swelling moments and big builds throughout the record on every track. And I really like just the organic presentation. These songs, Tom, you've said this a number of times on our podcast so far, that these songs just create a sense of space. Like you can really feel like you're walking around in this different environment, and that takes a special element of craft. Now, Tom and I had the privilege of actually interviewing this band. We interviewed Emily and Dan from Cross Record. I think it was like earlier this month. And you guys can go out there and check out our interview in our podcast feed. But these guys just know exactly what they want out of music, it seems. Like they just have a very finite, focused understanding of exactly the sound that they're going for, and then they just work at it until they get this polished presentation that just works so incredibly well.
Don't say my name as if it ever mattered.
At number 2 on our list is the newest album from Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Skeleton Tree. This album is a kind of a burden to listen to in just how moving and dense it is.
I'd even use the word devastating.
Absolutely. That's probably the best word for it. While the songwriting occurred, a lot of it, I believe, occurred before the tragic death of Nick Cave's son. The album was recorded after that, and you just hear that come through in Nick's performance. A lot of this is just some of the most heart-wrenching and raw and emotional performances that you've ever heard from Nick Cave, but it's paired, I think, with some of his most interesting songwriting. These compositions, they focus around a lot of the traditional piano and kind of softer rock arrangements that we've heard Nick Cave doing recently, but with his classic vocals on top, just pulling everything into this darkness. And this album, it's one of those that I'm almost afraid to come back to because of the way that it makes you feel. But for that reason, you have to give it credit because it's just so effective.
But the echo comes back empty. Yeah, nothing is free.
Well, Tom,
Yeah.
for the first album on our list, this is going to be no surprise to anyone who has
No.
listened to our podcast at all before, because in every single podcast, I have to bring up Radiohead at some point in
Yep,
time.
you sure
and in
do.
this podcast, I have to bring up Radiohead now because they have our favorite album, what I would consider the top album released in 2016 with their 9th studio record, A Moon-Shaped Pool. So we did a whole podcast just dedicated to A Moon-Shaped Pool.
Yeah.
Right after this album came out back in May, and I gotta say, not a lot has changed for me since then. This is Radiohead's attempt at some sort of, I mean, like, what do you even call this? I mean, you can't call it new age, you can't call it indie rock. I mean,
More art rock,
kind of, but it's Radiohead. Presented in a new format. I think the closest comparable album of theirs to this is In Rainbows, but this doesn't have as much of the guitar on this record. It's more based around orchestral string presentation, which Johnny Greenwood, the guitarist and multi-instrumentalist for Radiohead, it actually did all the composition for that, and it's just very, very polished and well done. And what you have to look at here, and I think that what we talked about in our deep dive of this record, is specifically the emotional connection that comes through in Thom Yorke's vocals when it comes to like the sense of relationship. This is a breakup record.
Yeah.
And Thom Yorke, who had separated from his partner of a long time back in like midway through 2015, and actually his partner actually died of cancer recently, which is too bad. 2016 is relentless.
Yeah.
But it kind of does put into perspective some of the lyrics that you hear on this record, and then ending the record with a remake of their classic live song True Love Waits in a completely different context. This thing, I had a lot of... I actually struggled with this record. While I loved it, I found myself just feeling terrified by this record at just the sense of acceptance that is presented in the sound and in Thom Yorke's vocals. And since then, I still have struggled to come back to it for that reason, but I have to say, like, I have grown to appreciate every single track on this album. I think every track on this album is stellar in its own right, and really it's one of Radiohead's best albums. I'm still not able to from a less biased perspective rank this in accordance to the rest of the Radiohead albums, but I'm getting closer. But maybe a year out I'll be able to do that.
I think it'll just take time because we've had so much time with the rest of Radiohead's discography. And what I think makes A Moon-Shaped Pool a great Radiohead record, and what I want to see in any band's progression, is that they are reinventing themselves, but very subtly. There are trademarks of typical Radiohead in this album. You hear each of their input. You hear even Phil Selway's drum contribution, sometimes with the more electronic components, sometimes with the real drums. Tom York's vocals. You mentioned Johnny Greenwood's compositions and the guitar work on there, as well as Ed O'Brien and Colin Greenwood contributing on the guitar and bass, respectively. You still hear it very distinctly as each member of the band's contribution, but it comes together to make something wholly different from what they've done. And it is a little bit less dynamic. It doesn't quite have the high points that really anything, and when I say high points, I mean dynamically. I mean on a 0 to 10 intensity scale, it doesn't ever really get much above like a 7. And that's a little bit of a struggle for me, but man, the songwriting here is just so well done, and Nigel Godrich's production is stellar as always. This is an audiophile level record, and really I realized that when I listened to it through headphones for the first time. There's so much of a stereo and three-dimensional element to this. This is something we've talked about a lot in this podcast, Jake. I think that's something that you and I just like, is something that creates a sense of space, something that you almost paints a picture of a room, that describes the edges and the boundaries of where the music is, and that's something this album does brilliantly, which complements the songwriting with a lot of flourishes and flutters from piano, guitars that come in and out of the mix that are never necessarily the focus, but still support the experience in kind of an otherworldly way. I just think that they really did a great job making something singular that's set apart from anything else coming out in music, that's set apart from anything else that Radiohead has done in the past. So it makes sense that Moon-Shaped Pool would be our number one for this year. Right when it came out, I wouldn't have anticipated that. But that's what I love about these grower albums, that you get to know and end up surprising you.
Sing a song on the jukebox that
What a year, Tom.
I know, another one in the books.
Do you have any parting thoughts on 2016 when in reference to the albums that came out in 2016?
This was an interesting year for albums because for me, and I'm probably alone in this, but let me know what you think, Jake. I actually think this was one of the weaker years for albums since we've started covering music back in like 2009, 2010.
I would agree with that. And I think that our number one being A Moon-Shaped Pool, when you were just talking about that album, you mentioned that you wouldn't have expected that this would have been our favorite album in May.
More, and that speaks partially to, how slow I was to warm up to it,
sure,
but also partially to just what I've come to expect from a year in music is that every year since we've started doing this, at least one album has come out that has just ended up being one of my favorite albums of all time. Last year, we had like 3 of those with Kendrick Lamar, Deaf Heaven, and Blur. Those 3 were great. Honestly, A Moon-Shaped Pool was our number 1 this year. If it had come out last year, I don't know if it would have made my top 4 or 5.
Right.
And that speaks more to my preferences than it does some larger statement about the current state of music, because a lot of people are loving a lot of albums from this year more than I was. But where I think that this year made up for it is going to be our next podcast, which is songs.
Yeah.
I had a lot harder time sorting out individual tracks because I think that what I saw this year is a lot of albums that didn't necessarily come together as fully tremendous, cohesive statements across the whole album,
Right.
but had individual songs that just blew me away.
I completely agree with that. I had a blast putting together our songs, favorite songs list, which we'll go into the science of doing that in our next podcast. The next podcast you'll hear from Tom and I is our top songs of 2016 podcast, which will do the top 30 songs on the podcast and then provide a bigger list. So that's next time. Man, this was a fun year. I feel like another thing, I agree with everything you said about the albums that came out this year, but another thing is that I hit so many artists I was not familiar with before.
Yeah.
And that is something that I feel like every year I can say that to another level. And I think that's a statement to how easy it is for artists to get their work out there and distributed nowadays. You don't like anybody. The reality is that anybody with a laptop can make a good record if they have the talent to make a good record. So I think that just the viability of somebody with a musically artistic mind can get out there and record some stuff and make a good record and get it out there. It's just far more possible to do that now than it was at the beginning of this decade.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that's really special. And it also very challenging as someone who's trying to keep up with all of the albums that are released every week, which gets overwhelming at times. So personal thank you I want to give to Tom. Tom has taken the brunt of, I've had a second child this year and I've had a very busy year. Tom takes the brunt of the work of previewing a lot of the albums and then filtering the list down for me. So I appreciate that, Tom, because I noticed there's a lot of albums that we tentatively scored in the 60s that I didn't actually have to listen to. So that was very good.
I'll tell you
ASAP Ferg would be one of those.
I'll tell you what, man. I love listening to music that I don't like.
Yeah, me too.
That's why this is great for me,
Yep.
because I'm still expanding my horizons, and even if I don't like it, if I can identify why, if I can find something to say about it, then it's cool with me. So, no problem, man.
This is going to be a poor transition because this is certainly not music that I didn't like. But one other thing I want to bring up is that I had on my list Tom Hummer's fourth album, Dystopian Blues. And while this
thanks, man.
While this is a little bit self-serving to take a moment to feature Tom's newest record, I want to do it because Tom has we did a podcast earlier in the year called How I Write Music, a personal story from Tom Hummer, and I kind of just surprised Tom by interviewing him about his music. And Tom had just released was about to release his fourth album, Dystopian Blues, which is I would classify as a shorter post-rock record, a little bit different than the three he had put out previously. But I think it is an absolutely brilliant listen, and if you're into post-rock, it is absolutely a record you need to go check out because it's one of my favorites of the year. In fact, I would say that if I felt good enough, if I felt justified to do it, which I don't because I think it would be too self-serving, I would have put it as my favorite album of the year.
Well, thanks, man.
It is certainly, to me, the
I
album
certainly
I've
wouldn't be able to do that.
Right. To me, it's the album I've come back to the most this year, and you released it in June, so... please, if you can or have any interest, go check out Tom's album Dystopian Blues. It's on Spotify. Just search for Tom Hummer or go to www.tomhummer.com. Enough of that self-promotion aside. I'm interested, what were your favorite albums? Give me your top 5 favorite albums from 2016. And also, what albums did Tom and I leave out? What did we omit from our list? Because we're going to do an honorable mentions and total misses podcast here in a week or two. We'll put that out. But that's based entirely off of your guys' feedback on the albums that you would have liked to seen shown up on our list or albums that you really liked. So please take the time to send us a Facebook message or comment on our YouTube video or just shoot us an email at velocitiesandmusic@gmail.com, and we will take the time to go through all your responses and collate a good list to provide in that podcast. So at the end of every podcast, we say thank you to you guys, but I really, really mean it. Thank you guys for your continued support and participation with Velocities in Music. 2016 has been a great year, and you guys helped make it great. Tom and I, of course, always love your comments on our YouTube videos, your Facebook messages, and your emails to us. Your participation truly is what makes Velocities in Music possible. So as always, thank you for being awesome. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music. Here's to 2017, and we are going to move music discussion forward.